The explosion was deafening, the ground beneath Jack's boots trembling as debris rained down from the sky. The jungle surrounding him was a nightmare of fire and smoke, the scent of burning wood mixing with the acrid stench of gunpowder. His heart raced, adrenaline pumping through his veins as he sprinted across the battlefield, dodging explosions and gunfire. A bullet grazed his arm, searing pain flaring in his shoulder as his vision blurred momentarily. "Get to the chopper," someone shouted through his earpiece. He couldn't tell who. It sounded like Sergeant Marino's voice, but the static made it hard to be sure. Jack's head was pounding, blood from his wound soaking through his shirt, his body feeling heavier with each step. His men were scattered, each fighting for their lives, the mission slipping further and further from success. The enemy had anticipated their every move. The jungle was no longer a place of concealment but a maze of sniper nests and ambushes. The sound of rifles firing from all directions set Jack's teeth on edge. He stumbled over a fallen log, pain coursing through his legs as he struggled to get up. Through the haze, he saw Sergeant Moreno, sprawled out in a heap, blood pooling beneath him. There was no time to mourn, no time to stop. Jack gritted his teeth and pushed forward, toward the extraction point. Then, just as he was within 100 yards of the chopper's landing zone, the ground beneath him seemed to explode, a mine detonation sending him flying through the air. His body slammed into the earth with a sickening thud, and for a moment, everything went black. When Jack awoke, it wasn't to the smell of smoke or the harsh crackle of radio static. The air was clean, sterile almost, the smell of antiseptic sharp in his nostrils. His vision cleared, and he found himself staring up at a ceiling of white, too clean, too quiet. He blinked, confusion clouding his thoughts. His body felt strange, almost weightless. He shifted slightly, and the discomfort of his wounds was gone. There were no cuts, no bruises, no blood, nothing. He reached up to touch his face, expecting pain, but found only smooth skin, unmarred by the usual signs of injury. "Easy there," a voice said, light and conversational. A man in a lab coat stepped into his view, his face appearing to be a blur at first. Jack tried to sit up, but the man gently pushed him back down. "You've been through a lot, Jack. Don't try to move too quickly." Jack's mind spun. What happened? Where am I? "Welcome to your new life," the man said with a chuckle, pulling a chair next to the bed. "You've been selected for a special project. You're at the Advanced Military Research Center, a little off the grid, if you will." Jack opened his mouth to speak, but his throat felt dry, as if he hadn't spoken in hours. The man reached over to a small tray beside the bed, offering him a water bottle. Jack drank gratefully, the cool liquid soothing his parched throat. His thoughts were still muddled, but he felt more alert with every sip. "We'll get to the details soon," the man continued, smiling a little too widely. "For now, just know that you're part of a cutting-edge experiment. You've been given a new chance. No more pain. No more weakness." Jack's eyes narrowed. "Experiment? Right." The man nodded. "You're not just any soldier now, Jack. You've been enhanced." He gestured to a monitor on the other side of the room. "Nanotechnology. Nanobots. They've been injected into your bloodstream. They'll heal you, make you stronger, faster. You'll never be the same again." Jack frowned, trying to process. He tried to sit up again, feeling his strength returning. His limbs were stiff, but not in a way that suggested injury, just a newness, like he'd been asleep for days. He felt different. "Nanobots," he repeated, the word sounding strange on his tongue. "Yes," the doctor said, his tone cheerful, but with a hint of something colder lurking beneath. "Microbots designed to repair tissue, enhance physical capabilities, and even extend human endurance. It's like having an army of tiny engineers inside you, fixing everything that goes wrong." The words began to sink in. "So, I'm a lab rat now?" Jack asked, the edge of bitterness in his voice. Not exactly, the man replied with a wink. Think of it as a new form of soldier. A super soldier, if you will. Jack rubbed his eyes, trying to make sense of what was happening. The last thing he remembered was being blown up. He had been certain that he was going to die, that he had no chance of making it out alive. Yet here he was, whole, unscathed, and confused as hell. The man continued, we've replaced your body's natural healing processes with the bots. They'll repair any damage instantly, and they can enhance your strength, reflexes, stamina, pretty much everything you need to be at the peak of human ability. Instant healing? Jack repeated, his voice trailing off. He was still processing the sheer absurdity of it all. You're telling me that I'm some kind of cyborg? Not quite, the man said, waving a hand dismissively. Cyborgs have mechanical parts. You're still all human. The nanobots are just, well, they're kind of like an operating system for your body. A very advanced one. You'll feel better, stronger, faster, more alert. We've designed this to make you the best soldier possible. You're not a lab rat, Jack. You're a prototype. Jack stared at the man, trying to find something in his expression, any sign that this wasn't all as weird as it sounded. But there was nothing. The man was too calm, too collected. There was no hint of guilt, no regret in his eyes. Jack wasn't sure what to think, but he knew one thing for sure. Something wasn't right. The man stood up and patted Jack on the shoulder as if they were old friends. Rest for now, Jack. We'll get you back in action soon. We've got a lot of work to do. You're going to do great things. Jack didn't reply, watching as the man exited the room. The door clicked shut behind him, and Jack was left alone in the sterile quiet of the lab, the weight of the situation settling heavily on his chest. His head throbbed again, but it wasn't the pain he was used to. It was something else. Something deep inside, like his brain was being prodded by a force he couldn't see. He reached up to rub his temples, but the sensation wouldn't go away. A voice in his head whispered, "You're more than you were before." He froze, his hand still resting on his temple. The voice wasn't his own. He shook his head, brushing the feeling aside. "Get a grip, Jack," he muttered under his breath. But the voice came again, faint but clear. "You will never be the same again." Jack lay still, staring at the ceiling. The voice inside his head, distant yet unmistakably there, kept echoing like a shadow on the edge of his mind. "You will never be the same again." At first, he thought it was the side effect of the nanobots, a kind of auditory hallucination, maybe. It didn't make sense, but then again, none of this made sense. What had they done to him? He was supposed to be dead. Instead, he was better. Stronger. Faster. A weapon of the future. He tried to shake the thought from his head, but it lingered like an itch just beyond reach. The more he tried to ignore it, the more it consumed him. After a while, the door to his room opened again, this time revealing a woman. Her uniform was crisp, the insignia of the Special Operations Division clearly visible on her shoulder. She was tall, with sharp features and a no-nonsense look in her eyes. She wasn't here to make small talk. "How are you feeling?" she asked, stepping into the room without waiting for an answer. Jack glanced at her, then back at the ceiling. "Like a guinea pig," he said dryly. She didn't laugh. Instead, she pulled up a chair beside the bed, her expression unreadable. "We've been monitoring your vitals. Everything's normal. You've adapted quicker than expected." Jack turned his head slowly, eyeing her with suspicion. "What's normal anymore? You injected me with nanobots. That's not normal. That's insane." She didn't seem to take offense, only nodded. "I understand how it must seem. But this is the future, Jack. This is what soldiers will be like in the next decade, if not sooner. And you're the first." She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. The perfect soldier. He swallowed hard. There it was again, the voice, that whisper in his mind, the perfect soldier. It wasn't his own thought. He hadn't thought it. It was like the nanobots were starting to stitch themselves into his consciousness. "What's the real agenda here?" he asked suddenly, his voice sharp. "You said, the future. Who's deciding that future? Who's pulling the strings?" The woman didn't answer immediately. She studied him, her gaze cold but calculated. Then, she spoke in a way that made it clear she was giving him just enough information to shut him up, but not enough to satisfy his curiosity. "There's a war brewing. A global conflict that no one sees coming. You're just one of many soldiers we've enhanced for the future. There are more of us, other units, other test subjects. You're the first, but not the last." Jack felt a chill creep over him. The way she said it, so casually, as if it was already inevitable, already set in motion, made his stomach turn. He was part of something much bigger than himself, and he hated that feeling. "More of us." "Right," he muttered, sitting up now. His body felt like it was waking up, like a machine coming to life. There was no pain, no aches. It was a strange, eerie sort of clarity. He was awake and alert in a way that didn't feel human. It felt wrong. But he couldn't fight it. She didn't wait for him to digest the information. "We need you for a mission," she continued, her voice sharp and professional, as though she were offering him nothing but a routine task. "It's an urgent assignment. You're the best we've got. The nanobots have already enhanced your strength, your stamina. Now we need you to test the next phase. Your ability to think quickly, to adapt without hesitation." Jack didn't answer right away. He wasn't sure if he wanted to know what "test" meant. But the thought of staying here, in this sterile room, waiting for whatever came next was worse than anything they could throw at him in the field. "All right," he said, standing up. His legs felt like they belonged to someone else, like they were part of a machine. A machine built to kill. "I'm in. But I want answers. No more secrets. No more games." The woman looked at him, eyes narrowing. "You'll get your answers in time. Right now, you have a job to do." By the time Jack was dressed in his tactical gear, ready for whatever lay ahead, the feeling in his head was stronger. The voice was no longer a whisper. It was growing louder, clearer. It didn't feel like his own thoughts anymore. "You will obey. You will fight." He grabbed the edge of the table, feeling a surge of anger rise in his chest, but it wasn't his anger. It felt like the anger of something else. Something inside him was pushing him forward, making him want to fight, to kill. It was a strange, primal feeling. Not the kind of rage he'd experienced in the field, the kind born out of survival and the need to protect his comrades. This felt manufactured. It felt wrong. But the more he tried to fight it, the stronger it became. The nanobots were taking hold of him, and he wasn't sure how much longer he could hold on to his own thoughts. The woman, he'd forgotten her name already, led him through a maze of hallways, down to an underground hangar where a helicopter waited. The sound of blades slicing through the air felt almost too loud, like it was vibrating through his bones. There were two other soldiers waiting by the helicopter, both of them in similar gear, their faces hard and unreadable. They didn't look at him. They didn't even acknowledge his presence. "Get in," she ordered, motioning toward the open door of the chopper. "You'll be briefed in transit." Jack didn't respond. He climbed into the helicopter and settled into one of the seats, staring out the window as the landscape below began to shrink. The low thrum of the chopper's blades was oddly calming, but the gnawing sensation in his chest wouldn't go away. He tried to breathe, tried to think, but the voice in his head was growing louder. It felt like the nanobots were doing something to him. He could feel them now, moving through his bloodstream like little agents, adapting to him, merging with his thoughts, guiding him. You are our weapon. The words hit him like a punch to the gut. His hand tightened around the seat. He didn't want to believe it. Didn't want to accept it. But the more he tried to resist, the more the voice pushed back. The helicopter began its descent. Jack blinked, shaking his head, trying to clear the fog from his mind. He couldn't focus. He couldn't think. His emotions were shifting too rapidly: anger, frustration, fear, and then, suddenly, a bizarre sense of elation. Like he was on the verge of something great. Something terrifying. "We're here," the woman said, her voice cutting through the haze in his mind. Jack glanced up to see the ground approaching quickly, an isolated compound nestled in the middle of a dense forest. Armed guards surrounded the perimeter. There was no doubt in his mind that this place was heavily fortified. But the real question was, what was it that he was supposed to do here? The helicopter landed with a sharp jolt, and Jack's mind seemed to snap back into focus. The door opened, and the cold air hit his face like a slap. His boots hit the ground, the cold concrete beneath his feet grounding him, for the moment at least. His teammates moved swiftly, the tension in their bodies a clear sign that this was no routine mission. They were here for something specific, something dangerous. "Move," the woman barked, leading the way into a building ahead. Jack followed, his senses hyper-aware, each step measured, the nanobots enhancing his reflexes, heightening every sound, every movement around him. The doors slid open with a hiss, and they entered a darkened corridor that smelled faintly of oil and metal. In the distance, Jack could hear the faint hum of machinery, but something else was there too. Something darker. A presence. "You're ready." He felt a jolt run through him, the voice inside his head loud now, commanding, absolute that he was ready. But for what? The answer came moments later as they entered a large room, filled with monitors and scientists in lab coats who glanced up as they entered. At the center of the room, surrounded by glass and steel, stood a machine, a massive, towering structure that hummed with power. "This," the woman said, her voice cold, "is the next phase. We need you to test your limits. We need you to shut it down." Jack's pulse quickened. He stepped forward, but his mind was still clouded. What the hell was this thing? The woman didn't answer. She just looked at him, as if waiting for something. A sudden surge of anger flooded his body, and the voice in his head whispered once again. "Shut it down, Jack. You will. You must." The nanobots were no longer just healing him. They were guiding him. They were driving him, and suddenly, he knew what he had to do. The voice in Jack's head grew louder, almost a roar now. "You must shut it down." The words weren't his own, but they rang in his ears, sharp and insistent. He felt the nanobots inside him responding, attuning themselves to the command, as if they were aligning with the very thought. The machinery ahead of him buzzed, a low hum vibrating through the floor beneath his boots, and Jack's gaze locked onto the towering structure. Whatever it was, it had to be stopped. He didn't know how or why, but he felt a burning certainty deep in his chest. He was the one who had to do it. The woman beside him gave no orders, just a subtle nod, and the rest of the team fell back, moving out of sight, as if they were waiting for Jack to do the thing they couldn't, or wouldn't, do. It made him uneasy, but he couldn't stop. His body moved on its own, faster than he could think, his legs carrying him toward the center of the room where the enormous machine loomed. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. The voice guided him now, every step, every movement, all dictated by the nanobots coursing through his bloodstream. His fingers twitched, flexing as they neared the control panel in front of him. The panel was sleek, with a series of red buttons, and a large central display that pulsed in rhythm with the hum of the machine. Jack reached for the panel without hesitation. His fingers slid over the smooth surface of the controls, and before he could fully register what he was doing, his hand hit the largest button in the center, a flashing red indicator that seemed to respond to his touch almost as if it were alive. The machine before him shuddered, its hum increasing in intensity, and Jack felt the air around him grow thick, charged. The nanobots were working faster now, amplifying his strength, his speed, pushing him toward a singular purpose. He could feel the rage, the command. He was being guided. No, he was being controlled. The lights above flickered and went dark, the hum of the machine now a deafening roar. Jack jerked back as the display on the console flashed red, the words "System Malfunction" scrolling across the screen. Suddenly, the air around him shifted. It wasn't just the nanobots anymore. His mind was expanding, his thoughts becoming chaotic, as if he were no longer the only one in control. He stumbled backward, the voices inside him, growing louder, more insistent. The nanobots had never been just about physical enhancement. They were about something far more dangerous: control. He realized it now, a split second of clarity in a sea of noise. They had manipulated him from the start. They had chosen him because he was weak, because they knew his mind was malleable, susceptible to their influence. They didn't need soldiers who could think, who could feel, they needed machines. And that's what he had become. A machine with a human shell. "You have no choice," a voice echoed in his mind, chilling and flat, and yet it was somehow soothing. "You will finish this." He turned, eyes wild, and saw the woman, standing in the doorway. Her face was cold, expressionless. She didn't look afraid, she looked expectant, as if she knew exactly what was happening to him. Her eyes gleamed with satisfaction. "Jack," she said, her voice calm, almost too calm. "You're ours now. You were never meant to be anything more than a tool. Just a weapon." The words didn't fully sink in. He couldn't understand how it had come to this, how he had gone from soldier to weapon, to puppet. But the rage surged again, and this time, it wasn't just the nanobots. It was something else, something deeper inside him, a survival instinct, perhaps. He had been used, manipulated, and now he was the one who had to decide what came next. "Stop this," he ground out through gritted teeth, but the words barely left his lips before the rage surged, controlling him, forcing him to act. His hand slammed down again on the console, his fist driving into the panel with such force that the lights above flickered once more. The machine groaned in protest as it shuddered and buckled, its internal systems beginning to overload. He could hear the woman's voice again, though it was muffled by the noise in his head. "You don't get it, do you?" Her voice sounded almost sad, like she was pitying him. "You're not going to escape this. It's already too late." The nanobot surged through his bloodstream, a river of artificial life that pulsed with each beat of his heart. His body felt stronger than ever, his muscles straining with the effort of holding back the flood of emotions threatening to tear him apart. He was fighting them now, trying to break free from the web they had woven inside him, but it wasn't enough. The anger, the violence, it was all being directed. He could feel himself slipping, losing the battle. The machine before him flared with light, its hum reaching a deafening crescendo. Jack didn't have time to think anymore. He only acted. His arm shot out, palm hitting the control panel, and then, the world exploded in a flash of white. When Jack came to, everything felt different. The sound of the world, once a distant hum, was muted. His mind was clearer, but in the way someone wakes from a nightmare only to realize they've fallen into another. The nanobots were still inside him, but they weren't in control. Not anymore. He could feel them, like a shadow behind his thoughts, but they no longer had the power to dominate him. He opened his eyes, blinking rapidly, trying to make sense of his surroundings. The woman was gone. The room was still, save for the flickering remnants of the machine, its massive form twisted, sparking at the edges like something torn apart from the inside. His head throbbed. The voice that had been driving him was quiet now. Almost silent. It took a moment for him to understand. He had done it. He had shut it down. But at what cost? He stood slowly, every part of his body feeling like it belonged to someone else. His muscles were stronger than before, and yet they felt alien, too. His senses were on high alert, and his mind was so damn clear it hurt. The nanobots still lived within him, but now he was the one who commanded them. For now, anyway, but he knew this wasn't the end. There would be no going back. He couldn't undo what had been done. He was changed, no longer just a soldier. He was something else now, something that existed between man and machine. The door to the lab slid open with a hiss, and the familiar face of the woman appeared once more. She was calm, but her eyes betrayed her. "You're not done, Jack," she said quietly. "There's a lot more we need from you." Jack's gaze shifted to the smoking remains of the machine, his mind still reeling from the realization. The voice was gone for now, but the nagging feeling that he wasn't alone in his body, that feeling would never leave him. "You're wrong," Jack said, his voice cold, distant. He wasn't sure if he was speaking to her or to the nanobots inside him, but it didn't matter. "You've lost me. And you'll never get me back." She didn't reply at first. Her lips tightened, and she studied him carefully, as if calculating his next move. "You think you're free?" she asked after a long pause. "You think this is over? You're not the one in control here. We are." Jack's lips twisted into a bitter smile. "We'll see about that." Without another word, he turned and walked out of the room, his steps echoing down the sterile corridor. Every footfall felt like a finality. He was free, but freedom had its price. The nanobots inside him would never truly leave, but Jack was no longer the puppet they once controlled. He was something new. Something dangerous, and now, he would figure out how to use that power.